So on May 26th of this year, the YouTube channel Minute Physics put out a video featuring one Max Tegmark, in which they argue that there is something fundamentally mathematical about nature, and that one could even go as far as saying that everything in the universe is mathematical.
Some think it means nothing profound, or that math is simply something we've made up to be useful. Others think it means that there's something fundamentally mathematical about nature. And the most extreme possibility is that our universe is completely mathematical, in the sense that it has no properties except mathematical properties.
Now this might seem like an interesting proposition if you think about it. With math, we have been able to describe the movement of the planets, gravity, terminal velocity of light, and a host of other things. But then, they bring up an example that's counterintuitive to their claim. They mention the cuteness of a sheep, and how the cuteness of a sheep cannot be mathematical. Then they dismiss and say, well, that doesn't really matter because the sheep is made up of atoms anyway, and atoms are made of electrons, etc., etc. And in the end, each of these particles has a value of plus and minus 1, so the cuteness doesn't really matter. What matters is that the sheep exists, and it's made of plus and minus 1s, therefore the sheep itself is purely mathematical.
A sheep has properties such as cuteness and fluffiness, not mathematical properties. Yet we know that this sheep and everything else in our universe is ultimately made of elementary particles such as electrons and quarks. And what properties does an electron have? Smell? Color? Texture? No, only properties like -1, 1/2, and 1. We physicists call these properties electric charge, spin, and lepton number, but the electron doesn't care what we call them. The fundamental properties that an electron has are just numbers, mathematical properties. And as far as we know, all elementary particles, the building blocks of everything around, are purely mathematical objects in the sense that they don't have any properties except for mathematical properties.
There are several problems with this kind of thinking, and I'm going to go ahead and share some of them with you guys. The first one is the dismissive attitude with which they treat things that don't necessarily fit their model. Can't be explained by math? Well, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. It's not real. Now, the cuteness of a sheep is clearly real, but according to their definition of the universe, it's not, because it's not mathematical. Oddly enough, this makes me think of other things curiously named values, which are real and which are subjective and which, curiously enough, are variable between different people, but that don't really have an equation, that they can't be explained mathematically, but that instead are questions of philosophy. What is beauty? What does it mean to be beautiful? Does beauty mean to be tall and have certain facial proportions and have long legs, etc.? But then what about people who find this beautiful? Cuteness, not just of a sheep, but cuteness in general. This general formula for cuteness: big head, big eyes, and a small body. I mean, sure, puppies are cute, kittens, and whatever, but what about Gollum? He seems to fit the generally accepted criteria of cuteness, but he clearly is not. So these things cannot be explained with math, therefore they're not real, therefore they don't matter. First time I read about this kind of dismissive attitude was when I was going over Noam Chomsky's early work on linguistics. He was a big advocate for morphology and etc., the so-called hard linguistics. So in a conference, someone asked him once, hey man, what do you think about social linguistics? And Chomsky replied, what about them? Now, in his mind, social linguistics didn't matter, even though that's clearly a large part of language development and the language acquisition process. In Chris Crawford's book On Narrative, we see a similar example of the kind of dismissive attitude towards things that don't necessarily fit with your worldview. In the early chapters, he writes about the difference between technology people and liberal arts people. And he says that people in the technology and sciences think of liberal arts folk as people who can only do soft thinking, that they can't really analyze problems, be problem solvers, etc. And at the same time, the liberal arts folk think likewise of the science folk, that they're not analytical, that they're not thorough in their research, that they can only do linear thinking. And then, as expected, Crawford takes a side, and he says, well, we technology folk, we make stuff, we make the iPhone, we made computers, etc., etc. And it sounds really cool and fancy when the arts people start talking about semiotics and other stuff that I don't understand, but that doesn't really matter, because they don't produce anything. They don't produce anything except framework to understand how humanity functions. And so in a Minute Physics, Mr. Tegmark says, oh, cuteness doesn't really matter because it's all about numbers. He's pretty much dismissing a large chunk of what makes the universe. That is how we perceive it. And indeed, how we perceive the universe is a large part of the universe itself. Even within physics, the age that we ascribe to the universe has to do with what we can see. And after all, Einstein did note that everything is relative. If you look at this other Minute Physics video,
Suppose you're watching a cat float freely in empty space, when suddenly it emits a flash of light in all directions. Let's imagine you get bored and zoom off in a spaceship in the middle of the experiment. But from your new perspective, you're sitting still in your spaceship, and the cat is the one moving past outside the window.
That nothing is an absolute. It has to do with how we perceive the universe. And so, what makes the movement of a cat any more or less valid than the cuteness of a sheep? Now, the second problem is that the claim that everything in the universe is mathematical is fundamentally wrong. And why it's wrong, it's because of what mathematics actually is. You see, mathematics isn't some kind of magical abstract thing that's out there. Mathematics is a language used to describe things. You don't have to take my word for it. Let's just believe this one guy. That's what he says about physics.
An equation in physics is just a shorthand description of something that can be represented in space and time. For instance, the equation that describes the arc of a pendulum shows that it can never swing higher than its initial height.
So, math is a shorthand notation that we use to describe what we see. Math is therefore a language. This makes only all the sense in the world. You see, when people say that math is universal, what they are essentially saying is that 2 + 2 = 4 is true everywhere, and this might indeed be true. However, the way in which we describe 2 + 2 = 4 is only universal as far as humans are concerned. You see, the number 2 is nothing more than an abstract symbol that we have given to a value. It is indeed true that E = mc². However, the values that we have ascribed to the letters, to the signifiers, E, the equal symbol, the M symbol, the C symbol, and the 2 symbol are nothing more than signifiers pointing at something else. The gravity formula, the magnetism formula, all of these things are just constructs built on arbitrary symbols that we have assigned to something that is out there. And it so happens that this language of math is not particularly good at describing things like beauty or cuteness or justice or fairness, bravery, courage, and all these other, again, curiously named values. So I thought to myself, if math can't describe everything, what can? I thought, well, language can, so does that make the universe linguistic by nature? You see, anything that is described in numbers can also be described in more traditional languages, English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, etc. And in addition, languages can describe things that math cannot. The cuteness of a sheep, the beauty of the sun rising over a vast field of flowers, etc. But I thought, man, I don't know, there's something wrong with that. There's got to be something more than just language. Because there are things that even language cannot appropriately describe. It's kind of like that shivery feeling that you get out of nowhere for no reason, and it makes you kind of trembly, and then your stomach feels weird, so you get all like the shivers. But shiver is an appropriate term to describe the entire sensation, it's just one of them. What this anger feeling, etc., emotions, cannot be appropriately described by language beyond the most basic and rudimentary functions. And then of course there's the even more problematic problem for physics, that once you pass the event horizon of a black hole, physics breaks down and math as we know it stops working. So if the laws of physics don't apply in a certain region of the universe, can we really say that everything in the universe is really mathematical? No, we can't. That's a problem with this kind of universal application of an idea, saying that every X is Y. So for over a month I thought, well, if there is one thing that the universe is, what is it? I had conversations with friends and thinkers, philosophers. The most convincing suggestion that they made is that the universe is nothing more than semiotics. That is, the universe is whatever we perceive it to be. The universe is signified and signifier. The universe is us assigning arbitrary values to whatever is out there. The universe is the process of signification. I thought, this might be. Certainly, this is partly true. Part of what makes the universe is how we perceive it. And there is a process going on that when we see something, or when we observe the phenomena, we want to put a label to that object or to that phenomena. That's the process of signification. But yet in that process, we don't entirely know what that thing out there is. Now, I couldn't figure out really what term to put to whatever the universe is in its entirety, so I was just about to give up. Then curiously enough, I started watching Sword Art Online, of all things, and there I was given the answer. You see, in the very first episode, the main character Kirito is discussing the difference between the real world and the virtual world, and he notes the following.
現実世界と仮想世界の違いって何なのかな。
情報量の大小だけさ。例えば ALO で手を握るのと現実でこうするのとはやっぱり違いがあるだろう。
そうね。本物の手の方がいろいろ感じられる。そっか、これが情報量が多いってことね。
So there you go, information. That made me think maybe everything in the universe, that stuff out there, the thing that we label with signifiers, in other words the signify, the universe itself is nothing more than information, data. The universe is information and data that sentient beings process and ascribe meaning to in order to find some sort of purpose. I thought that was pretty good, but it doesn't feel complete yet. So I kept thinking information, thought about Newton's laws, I thought about thermodynamics. And all of these things are systems. Gravity is at its core a system, the speed of light, etc. All of these things are systems. The way in which the universe works, the universe itself is just a system, and that large master system has different subordinate systems working in tandem to essentially make the universe run. And so everywhere you look, you will find systems, information, and systems. The universe is nothing more than a large information system. And so these systems can sometimes be best described by mathematics, and sometimes they can be best described through language, or other times they simply cannot be described, as is the case with emotions. But in the end, it really comes down to it. If there is something, a single thing that you can say the universe is, it would be the universe is systemic, not mathematical. Nature is systemic. The way in which the universe was created is systemic. Whether you agree with the scientific postulates about the creation of the universe, or whether you believe in the religious interpretation of the creation of the universe, it really comes down to everything just being information and systems. And we try our best to understand these systems through different disciplines. Math attempts to describe, by and large, more mechanical systems that are, by and large, fairly constant, while philosophers and liberal arts folk attempt to describe and understand systems that are more pertinent to humanity. Curious, huh? Humanities. Systems that are relevant to humanity as a whole, to societies, the way in which societies work, human interaction, linguistics, literary systems, etc. And so when the folks at Minute Physics say that there is something fundamentally mathematical about nature, and that perhaps the universe itself is mathematical, and disregard everything else, they are essentially shutting themselves off to understanding a large chunk of the systems that the universe runs. So there you have it. I hope you liked this video. Here's an end slate thing that I'm going to try out, and if you like this one, make sure to check out some of my other videos, or maybe even some of my conference talks, maybe some game development stuff. I'm not really sure what I'm going to put here, but hey man, whatever. Maybe subscribe. I'll see you next time.